I just want to name, I think, two trends that I'm really seeing. One is the transition from white majority-led organizations to BIPOC majority-led organizations, and how leaders of color are really looking to embody different ways of leading organizations that don't replicate the harmful practices that we know are really oppressive, and that often requires actually a different level of investment of resources to actually provide more space and care and not work at destructive paces, and trying to kind of reset expectations of what a normal workload looks like, and reset expectations around timelines, and dismantling practices around urgency is something that we're really trying to figure out at Faith in Action, both within our national staff, but also within our broader network. And we've had incredible progress with transitioning our leadership from majority white, again, to a lot of BIPOC leaders, particularly women, Black women. And one of my roles is holding space for Black women in our network. We now have almost 80 Black women staff in all roles, up to admin to executive director. We have almost 13 Black women who are leading in our federations. And so the second trend I would name is related to Black women leading. Some of the work we're doing is around actually like really deconstructing some of the harmful archetypes and frameworks that Black women have been kind of forced into. And so, and actually like holding space for us to actually work on some of that within ourselves as a community. And I think it's actually something that's really hard to talk about in kind of mixed spaces, but I think it's the kind of thing that's also deeply under-resourced, is how do we dismantle some of the narratives that come out of slavery around mammies, and this actually comes from some work we've been doing with an incredible woman named Dr. Donna Coltrane Battle, who's been doing work around archetypes of strong Black women and where those archetypes come from, and how do we disrupt some of those frameworks that are actually like really not serving us in our leadership and leading to martyrdom and other ways of being that are ultimately pretty harmful. So I think those are a couple under-resourced modes, questions, like both how do we support Black women's leadership in a really powerful way, and also how do we support the transition from white dominant to leader of color dominant organizations. So.
What's the name of the book?
Not a book. She may have written one as part of her dissertation that I don't know the title of, but Donna Coltrane Battle is a MDiv and PhD scholar, womanist theologian who's just done incredible work around Black women. I'm
actually doing a series this year of women of color in power, and I just interviewed the president of Borealis. I myself am a person of color in a mostly white organization, and so I hear you. I'm looking a lot at what does it mean to have us lead? What kind of support do we need? How do we lead differently? Do we? Really highlighting that. And we just did the first one and it was amazing. But yeah, the stuff comes up a lot, because oftentimes you have to do so much to even get to this point, and then the other folks around you don't even know that you know all that. Like they're just, you're at a whole different level in terms of the system that you're trying to change, and then trying to get everyone to understand that in a white org as a person of color who also has to like externally face a field that's looking to see what you're going to do differently. Like there's just a lot there, right? And so part of what Danielle and I do is actually we're constructing because I was asked by a funder of color, because there are also people of color moving into funding positions that get that. They told me to create a proposal of what does it take to support a leader like me in a role like this, so that I can continue to do the work externally. And so there's these people asking questions, and we're really kind of start to build that kind of infrastructure of what actually it is, right? So for me, it means having someone come in and create the systems that I need, right? And to explain to all the white folks what's going on, right? To tell them when their narrative about me needs work, right? So I don't have to do that. So I can actually go out there and talk and kind of be the person that shows what the organization is doing, and kind of build the partnerships and all the things that oftentimes these orgs don't have, right? Why we get hired to do that work.
I think that what is most live for me is the ways in which anti-Blackness shows up in BIPOC communities and the work that is ours to do around that. And then particularly the tensions between, I think, Black and Indigenous people because of our histories and the ways in which genocide and racism have been used. And am in a community of practice where some of that is being grappled with and named and trying to undone and unpacked and acknowledge just all of it. And it's really important and really painful. And it feels like something like kind of to what you were talking about, Isabelle, about like, I don't want to talk about it with everybody, you know, and I know I'm bringing it up here mainly just because I think it's really important. And so, you know, in this moment, there's like a lot of white dominant organizations and white people who are wanting help in their journey. And that's like a thing. And I'm grateful and I want white allies and, you know, it's all fabulous. And it's a lot of work and energy and effort and focus and attention. And so, you know, I guess I'm really like, how can we just be like, okay, a bunch of, you know, skilled white facilitators are going to take care of you all because we have really important work to do to decolonize ourselves. So that's where my heart is right now. Although I would say my, you know, my work practice isn't exclusively in that terrain.
I hear you. One of the things that I've been talking about is like we need to kind of have a concept almost like 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 versions of this work, because a lot of the work is the 1.0 type. There's a lot of money in that. And sometimes people in that field think that's the only field. And I think they're the ones who call me exhausted because they're trying to show people something that they don't want to see. And you know, there's also a lot of work happening in communities of color within people and like across all these groups, you know, and they're like, really, who's doing that work? And it just strikes me that oftentimes there are different aspects of this work and that they don't always talk. There's even different language that people use. And that kind of like, if I go into a group that is using DEI language and I don't use that language, I always get asked about language and like, how do I use language? You know, so I've just been noticing that.
You know, I stopped saying I do equity work because I'm tired of them expecting a certain thing. I think I do it, but I don't, I'm like, are you all ready to build community? Are we ready to do this? I mean, what I see is this dynamic of fragility and rage at every level, not just the white folks, because I do think I love what you said, Asha, because I think when I hear the state of race and power, the first thing I go, oh, it's a call from a rich white organization that wants me to solve their problem. Like, you know what I mean? And come in and do that work, which isn't it's not a bad piece of work but it's all usually considered a training. You know, it's like, okay, well, we got to talk about hiring. We got to talk about, there's the systems, there's the inside job, outside, there's a whole thing. How we handle that rage fragility dynamic and not do it in a cancel culture so that we can actually build community that it has resilient relationships to tackle this stuff and do the systemic work is sort of what I'm grappling with.
The idea that our workplaces should feel more community centric is now becoming a norm that we're actually rallying behind. And so if our work needs to feel like community, where we have values, where we're striving to live into them, that challenges everything about how we operate with one another, how we engage with one another. And so I think Asha is completely right around where the call comes from. Sometimes it's a preservation of the status quo, and sometimes it's to protect the comfort of folks who already have power. And when that's like when that's the premise of where the work is coming from, it's going to be short-sighted. But when the work is coming from, like, how do we reconcile all these multiple truths? How do we get more nuanced in understanding the impact of, as one of our colleagues calls it, a colonial project, 500 years of a colonial project, the impact of that on a day-to-day for anybody, white folks, people of color, for folks across the gender spectrum, the impact of the colonial project is very real, and we're now surfacing that. And there's going to be discomfort, and we're trying to create a space, I think, where that discomfort can lead to growth, can lead to learning, and can allow for us to develop more formative connections. So that's one of the things that I'm really feel like is the opportunity at this moment. There's the coded language and the kind of surface level stuff, DEI, anti-racism, et cetera. But it's a real invitation for us to go deeper in ways that in my short life, I've never seen across sectors, across workplaces. So it feels very promising.